Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 15, text number 34. Tadvamamushya paramasya vikunta bhartuhu kartum prakrishtamih dhimahi mandadhibhyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhavadrishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, let us consider how these two contaminated persons should be punished. The punishment should be apt, for thus benefit can eventually be bestowed upon them. Since they find duality in the existence of Vaikuntha life, they are contaminated and should be removed from this place to the material world, where the living entities have three kinds of enemies. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The reason why pure souls come into the existential circumstances of the material world, which is considered to be the criminal department of the Supreme Lord, is stated in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, text verse 27. It is stated that as long as a living entity is pure, he is in complete harmony with the desires of the Supreme Lord. But as soon as he becomes impure, he is in disharmony with the desires of the Lord. By contamination, he is forced to transfer to this material world, where the living entities have three enemies, namely desire, anger, and lust. These three enemies force the living entities to continue material existence, and when one is free from them, he is eligible to enter the kingdom of God. One should not therefore be angry in the absence of an opportunity for sense gratification. And one should not be lusty to acquire more than necessary. In this verse it is clearly stated that the two doormen should be sent into the material world, where criminals are allowed to reside. Since the basic principles of criminality are sense gratification, anger, and unnecessary lust, persons conducted by these three enemies of the living entity are never promoted to Vaikuntha Loka. People should learn Bhagavad Gita and accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna as the Lord of everything. They should practice satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord instead of trying to satisfy their own senses. Training in Krishna consciousness will help one be promoted to Vaikuntha. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. So we are seeing in this part of the Bhagavatam the four Kumaras trying to enter Vaikuntha, and they have been stopped by the two doormen, and the sages have become angry, and now they are speaking their angry words. And we are seeing in this particular verse, they sort of take an action, what should be done with these two doormen. Tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartuhu kartum prakrishtamih dhimahi mandadhibhyam. Mandadhibhyam. Dhihi means intelligence. Mandadhi means they are not acting very intelligently. Mandadhibhyam, these two. So let us consider, dhimahi, let us consider what should be done. Kartum prakrishtum iha. We should do something to them that will actually eventually benefit them. And what do they decide? Lokanitho vrajatam. Let them, itaha, from here in this Vaikunta, Lokan vrajatam, let them go away from here. Lokan ito vrajatam, because antarbhava drishtya, they have developed a vision of antarabhava. The Lord has one bhava, but they have developed an antarabhava. So, they have developed this kind of a antarabhava drishtya, so they should not be here. Lokanito vrajatam. They should go away from here. Where should they go? Papiyasas. Place where papiyasa, papis, sinful, wicked people go. And where Traya ime ripavo asya yatra. Ripavaha is enemies. Traya ime ripavaha. Traya ripavaha. Where people in this material world, let them go to this material world, where papiyasaha, sinful people live with three enemies. Ripavaha, Traya ripavaha. Let them live there. Let them go to the place where living entities live with three enemies. Therefore, let us consider, dhimahi, how these two contaminated persons, mandadhibhyam, should be punished. Kartum prakrishtam. The punishment should be apt, for thus benefit can eventually be bestowed upon them. Prakrishtam iha. Since they find duality in the existence in Vaikuntha life, antarbhava drishtya, they are contaminated, mandadhibhyam, and should be removed from this place, vrajatam, to the material world, lokan, itho vrajatam, where living entities have three kinds of enemies, traya ime ripavo asya yatraha. So, Srila Prabhupada has mentioned some very significant things in the material, in the purport. This is an example of two perfected living entities in the spiritual world, the doormen of Vaikuntha, Lokanitho vrajatam, leaving the spiritual world and coming to this material world. So, Prabhupada has used this word in the purport. The reason why pure souls come into existential circumstances of the material world, which is considered to be the criminal department of the Supreme Lord, is stated in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 27. So how the living entities, pure souls, come into this material world, what causes that? Why they come into this material world? And that is what is happening here, and that is explained, Prabhupada is saying, in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, verse number 27. So this verse, Prabhupada referred to this verse. There was, even during Srila Prabhupada's time, there would be discussions among devotees. So the living entities fall from the spiritual world. if they are in the spiritual world, they must be perfect. But they fall to the material world. How does that happen? So that is explained in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Ichha dvesha samuthena dvandva mohena bharata. Sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. Sarga means creation. Remember that verse in the Bhagavatam we read some time back. There are 10 topics in the Bhagavatam. Sarga, Visarga, creation, secondary creation, and so on. So Krishna is referring to the creation. Sarge yanti. Yanti means to come or to go to the sarga, to go to the material creation. Yanti deva vratan devan. So yanti means to go. Sarge yanti parantapa. So this is actually referring to living entities going to the material creation. So living entities falling to the material world. So why does that happen? Sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. The living entities, bewildered, come into this material existence. What is that bewilderment? Dvandva mohena bharata. Ichha dvesha samuthena dvandva mohena bharata. Dvandva moha, delusion of duality. That's what Krishna is saying here in the Gita. The same thing we are seeing here in the Bhagavatam. Antarbhava drishtya. Dvandva moha. Dvandva means duality. Having a desire and interest different from the Lord. That is called dvandva moha. Just like here, antara bhava drishtya. So as living entities, we are part and parcel of the Lord. It is natural that we must have an interest like the Lord. Our interests must be perfectly aligned with the interests of the Lord. But when we develop a different desire, a different understanding, a different mentality, antara bhava, then that is called dvandva moha. And then, because of that dvandva moha, ichha dvesha samuthena comes about. Prabhupada has explained very nicely, what is this ichha dvesha? Ichha means desire. Here it is specifically referring to desire to become the supreme. In fact, if you see in this material world, everyone in every field tries to become the foremost. Businessmen try to become the richest. Students try to become the smartest. Famous people try to become the most famous. Powerful people try to become the most powerful. So they are actually, this is the desire. The living entity is driven by that desire, ichha. And dvesha is envy of Krishna. When you hear that Krishna is the supreme, the thought, why should I accept Krishna is the supreme? Why Krishna is the supreme? Why can't I be the supreme? These two desires, ichha, dvesha, samuttena, dvandva mohena bharata. Actually, a living entity is not expected to have this kind of a thinking. A living entity is part and parcel of the Lord. Just like every part of the body tries to serve the whole body. That is natural. And when the part develops a different attitude, it is called antara bhava drishtya, dvandva moha, sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. Actually, it's interesting to see in what context Krishna says this. It's good to, like I remember sometime long ago, someone had told, when you see a word in a dictionary, like sometimes, of course now you don't see a dictionary, all those days are gone. You Google. When you see a word in a dictionary, some old people's good advice. You see one word before that and one word after that and learn 2 words. So you learn 3 words. In the same way, when you read a verse in the Gita, it's good to see one verse before and one verse after. And you will get to see the context. And it will help us develop a certain interesting perspective. So let's see why Krishna is saying this in the 7th chapter. And we'll come back to the Bhagavatam verse soon after that. Krishna is saying, Vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjuna bhavishyani cha bhutani mam tu vedana kaschana. Krishna is saying, I know, Vedaham, aham vedaha, I know, atitani, sama, I know equally, atitani, what is in the past, vartamanani, what is in the present, bhavishyani, what is in the future. I know the past, present and the future. Chabhutani, and I know all the living entities. I know the past, I know the present, I know the future. I know all the living entities. Mam tu vedana kaschana. But me, nobody knows. Mam tu vedana kaschana. Kaschana, mam na veda. They don't know me. Actually, Krishna is developing this idea. How people don't know me. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavritah mudoyam na. Anyway, I won't go into those things. There's a very interesting line of thinking that Krishna is developing. And then he has come to this point. Mam tu vedana kaschana. Me, nobody knows. Why they don't know? Krishna is explaining in the next verse. Why is it that they have come to this state that they don't know me in the material world? Because, O son of Bharata, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. This is the reason why they don't know me. Because they are born into this material existence with this duality, delusion of duality, and they have been overcome by this desire and hate, iccha, dvesha samuttena. But what is this iccha? What is this dvesha? We need the help of the acharyas to understand that iccha refers to desiring to become the supreme ourselves. Dvesha means not willing to accept Krishna as the supreme. Why can't I be the supreme? That envy, the desire and the envy. And dvandva moha, duality, delusion of duality, a difference of understanding that we should not have actually. In the next verse, Krishna explains who is eligible to go back to the spiritual world. This verse is talking about how the living entities came to this world. Now how can they go back to the spiritual world? That Krishna is saying in the next verse. Esham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmuktha bhajante mam dhrudavrataha. Esham tvantagatam papam. Those who have ended sinful activities, antagatam papam, jananam punya karmanam, and performing pious and virtuous activities, Te dvandva moha nirmukta. They have become freed from this duality, having a different idea. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Bhajante mam dhrudhavrataha. They worship me with firm determination. We'll come to this verse a few minutes later. There are some interesting things. So, the sages are deciding that these two living entities, Dhimahi, Mandadhibhyam, they have developed this Antarbhava Drishtya, Lokanito Vrajatam. So they should leave this Vaikunta and they should go to the material world. And what is that material world? Papi yasaha. Actually, the word papi, we all generally understand as one who has done papa. Right? Papi and papa. So, actually originally the word papi means most wicked person, evil person, such a person. So, let them go to the place where such evil, wicked people go. People live. And what do? They live with three enemies. Let them go to that world. See? That is why here in this verse also this contrast is there. Esham tva antagatam papam jananam punya karmana. Punya also again, one understanding is pious. Papa means sinful. Actually punya means very elevated, very exalted. Opposite of papa means very wicked, lowest. So here punya karmana means activities in relation with punya, virtuous. Acharyas describe that punya karmana refers to serving a pure devotee. If you read the purport also, Prabhupada is talking about that. It is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that if one actually wants to be liberated, he must render service to the devotees. See, it's punya karmana actually refers to serving devotees. Because they are the most exalted people. And should have ended antagatam papam, that sinful desires, sinful activities, one should have ended. So here, the sages are saying they should go to papi yasaha. Traya ime ripavo asya yatra. The three enemies, that is also Prabhupada has referred. That's also here in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna refers to in the 16th chapter, the three enemies of the living entity. Trividham narakasyedam dvaram nashanam atmanaha. This is the chapter which we are all chanting now. 16th chapter. Trividham narakasyedam dvaram nashanam atmanaha kamaha krodas tatha lobas tasmadetat trayam tyajet. So Krishna is saying, Nara idam narakasya dvaram. These three, Trividham narakasya dvaram. Trividham narakasyedam dvaram nashanam atmanaha. And this is one which na atmanaha nashanam. This can destroy. How soul can never be destroyed? What do we mean by that? Here, it is referring to degradation of the soul. Atma nashanam. It does not mean that soul will be destroyed, because soul can never be destroyed. It's already na jayate, na mriyate, it's understood. Here, Atma nashanam, that is why when we are reading the Vedic literatures, we should see it is to be, the meaning should be taken according to the context. So, Trividham narakasyedam dvaram nashanam atmanaha. And what are the three things? The three doors to hell? Narakasya kamaha krodaha tatha lobhaha. Lust, anger and greed. And Krishna's recommendation is tasmat. Therefore, you see, Prabhupada says whenever tasmat is used, it is like a conclusive statement. Krishna is making a conclusion after having analyzed something. These three are the gateways to hell and leads to the degradation of the soul. So, therefore, tasmat etat trayam tyajet. One should give up these three activities, kama, krodha and lobha. And if you see in the material world, in our present civilization, these three qualities are highly glorified. Kama, lust, it is highly promoted. Kama, krodha, okay, krodha to some extent it is very, even for good living, comfortable material living, is not very encouraging, so it's not so much advised. Lobha, greed, there's no such thing. One could, material civilization, Kali Yuga civilization encourages one to rise to higher and higher and higher. Keep trying, keep struggling, working hard. So, these are the three which are considered to be ripavaha, enemies of the living entities. And this is a world where papi asaha traya ime ripavo asya yatra. So just see the things that are, how in the material world, how we look at things. And this is highly glorified. All the newspapers, media, everywhere, cinemas, everything, kama is encouraged. And there's nothing wrong about it. People think it's highly promoted. And on the other hand, Krishna is saying, tasmadetat trayam tyajet. So that is why Kali Yuga is considered a very unfortunate age for those who are trying to practice Krishna consciousness. Maybe we'll find many kinds of hurdles. So one should be very determined. So, papi yasastraya ime ripavo asya yatra. And we also see a certain perspective the sages are showing. These two people who have antarbhava drishtya, lokan ito vrajatam, they should go away from here and go to papi yasatraya ime ripavo asya yatra. They should go to the material world. Actually, we here in the material world, we think, oh, our world is so great. Our country is so great, our place is so great, our, so many nice things are there. But the living entity, the great sages, in their estimation, material world is an abominable place. This is not a great place. That is why Srila Prabhupada always quoted Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saying, this is not a place for a gentleman. This is the perspective actually we must have. This is an enlightened perspective. We should have a perspective of enlightened persons. The sages are enlightened persons. How they look at the material world, it's actually a terrible place. The living entities, they are caught up in this material world, and the three enemies are constantly disturbing them, and they don't even know that. Imagine you are thinking he's your great friend and you are always having him with you, you are always consulting him, but actually you don't know he is your enemy. How unfortunate. And he's always advising us and we are following that. Lust, anger, greed, these things are constantly influencing us and we are accepting that influence and we are working in that direction. Just see. And finally, Srila Prabhupada concludes very nicely. People should learn, that is why Prabhupada uses the word papi asaha in the sense of a crime, criminality. In these last two purports, if you see, Prabhupada is using the words criminal department. This material world is a criminal department. In the sense of papi yasaha. Since the basic principles of criminality are sense gratification, anger and unnecessary lust, persons conducted by these three enemies of the living entity are never promoted to Vaikuntha Loka. People should learn Bhagavad Gita and accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna as the Lord of everything. So this is Prabhupada's recommendation here towards the end of the purport. People should learn Bhagavad Gita and accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna as the Lord of everything. They should practice satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord instead of trying to satisfy their own senses. And for doing this one, training in Krishna consciousness will help one be promoted to Vaikuntha. So there is a certain training that is required. Training in Krishna consciousness that will help one be promoted to Vaikuntha. And Srila Prabhupada has established an institution for training. And in this institution, in the process for this training to go back to Vaikuntha, a very important principle, again and again explained in the Vedic literatures, is that one should please a pure devotee. This is an inescapable principle. So how has Prabhupada instituted this in this institution, where Prabhupada has said that this institution can train us to go back to Vaikuntha? One very interesting example where Prabhupada points out this principle. During Prabhupada's time, there were several devotees. It was headed by Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Vishnujan Maharaj. These two sannyasis, they were heading a group of brahmacharis it was called Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party. RDTSKP it was called those days. So it became a very successful traveling Sankirtan party. The two sannyasis, both very good preachers, leaders at that time, those days. And they were traveling from one city to another city, conducting programs in American universities, and they recruited many devotees. Hundreds of devotees they were recruiting. And they had 3 big buses, and they used to have Radha and Damodar deities. And that's how it was called Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party. So one time, some of these devotees, who were made devotees, they had joined the temples or joined the traveling party, and Prabhupada had come to one place. And then these devotees were all lined up, about 100 of them, American young boys, clean shaved up, and they were all given a rose flower, and they lined up, and they came and offered the rose flower to Prabhupada, offered their obeisance, and Prabhupada was very happy. And then all of them were sitting there, and then Prabhupada addressed them, young bhaktas, all young from the American universities. So in that short address, Prabhupada says, if you serve Tamal Krishna and Vishnu Jana nicely, I'll be very happy. So this is actually Prabhupada showing an important principle. If you serve Tamal Krishna and Vishnu Jana nicely, I'll be very happy. So this is the system that Prabhupada created in the institution. Institution has certain leaders, and if we work to serve them nicely, this is what the devotees, some of them recalled. And they said, Prabhupada said, if you serve Tamal and Vishnujan nicely, I'll be very happy. And that will please the spiritual master. Because this is an institution serving Prabhupada's mission. And in an institution, it is expected that there is somebody playing the role of a leader, and everyone following the leader's direction and the vision and going ahead and doing different activities. And if we do this, as an institution it is serving Prabhupada's mission, that will please him. So it's actually a very important principle. Of course, the leaders have a very big responsibility. They have to represent Prabhupada. They have to themselves be following Prabhupada's instructions properly. And they should be constantly having that vision of serving Prabhupada's mission. That's the responsibility of the leaders. And if the devotees are serving them in fulfilling the mission of the institution, that is pleasing pure devotee, spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. This is the institutional system that Prabhupada has set up. And if we work in this institutional setup, we will be trained. Training in Krishna consciousness will come about and will help one be promoted to Vaikuntha. So, even in very simple occasions like this, Srila Prabhupada, what he said is something very significant. And this is an important principle that is actually working in the institution. And if the leaders are playing their role properly, and if the devotees are serving the leaders and following the systems and the services that have been assigned, then this whole training process will be working, and Srila Prabhupada will be pleased, and Prabhupada will be blessing the devotees, and we will be making progress to go back to the spiritual world. So we have come to this material world developing a Dvandva Moha, Antar Bhava Drishti, and now we can rectify that and get purified and go back to the spiritual world. All of these things are being discussed here in these purports. We'll stop here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.